I'd like to talk about the notion of application freedom. It seems to me this is our best, clearest path to how to kind of fix the internet, make the internet like good for people again. And let me just be clear, I think the internet is great. It has so many things that we love, from the fun global culture to direct, collaborative systems. I mean, the value of Wikipedia is unbelievable. We get these open education initiatives like Crash Course. The value of GitHub is off the charts. Of course, when problems happen, it's great in disaster relief. You've seen it expose corruption, and during the pandemic, remote collaboration was amazing. It was before too, and after since. But just that sort of the fact that we could suddenly move online and things basically kept working through so much of society and around the world. It's as an engine for economic growth. It's amazing. So that's all a given. Let's accept that. I think we all know it has enormous potential and is doing really good things even now. But also that the internet is pretty bad. It has, this is just kind of the list of things that came to my mind. I don't know if there's an objective list. Unfair bans, like the other day one of my videos of my kids was taken down for no discernible reason, and that happens, that's just why it's on the top of my mind. But so many times people talk about really unfair ways that judgments are made that are a problem to them, and a problem to society. On the flip side of that, it also can empower people doing considerable harm to the world, things that are not banned that maybe should be because they're harming people. It's a huge engine for surveillance, both sort of surveillance capitalism, doing it for money, and for government and other control reasons. There's corrupt algorithmic bias. We see this with feed algorithms all the time, like being tuned for, they don't say outrage, but it amounts to that, which is probably driving the divisions in society. There's all sorts of dark patterns, parts of applications that you don't want as the user, but the application developers put there because it makes them more money or achieves other ends. And some things lots of people have mentioned when I bring this up is they really don't like it when the user interface changes without, it doesn't give them anything they want, but still things change under them, and it's a very disquieting feeling. And similarly, policies can change in ways that are very unpleasant. I think all of these reflect a kind of underlying problem. Each application is its own community, its own database, it has its own policies. Effectively, it has its own police. Sort of metaphorically, we can say each one is its own kingdom, and it's got these walls between the kingdoms where you're kind of trapped. So this comes from an underlying problem, a sort of vendor lock-in that comes from social computing. When you have people using the computers to interact with each other, that's social computing. And let's take an example of a lot of people have wanted to move away from Twitter, either before or after the recent acquisition. And it's very hard to do that, because if you switch from Twitter to some other system that has all the same features, if it were exactly the same software, you would lose your feed, all the interesting things you see every day. You'd lose all the followers you work to achieve. You'd lose everything you ever posted. You'd lose all the conversations, the back and forth, the interactions. You'd lose your effect of training the algorithm, which is part of why you got the good feed. And sort of at a human level, you would lose your community. And who wants to do that? I mean, sometimes it's worth it, and you move somewhere else and start over. But that is not a trivial thing to do. So the lock-in of social computing is a significant problem. And so I'm defining the opposite of that as app freedom. You should just be able to switch apps. If let's say you like one salad dressing, maybe you use that every day for the rest of your life, every time you have salad. Fine, that's your choice. But there's no real problem with switching another one. If you want to try 5 other brands, that is not an issue. Similarly, you should be able to try 5 different Twitter clones in a day, see what they're like, but keep all the same history, the same state, the same interactions, so you're not really losing anything, and other people don't even notice Like, their interaction with you should be the same. Like, nobody cares which salad dressing you use. Nobody should care which social media platforms you use. It doesn't affect them, whereas right now we're totally the opposite. So as you switch to different competing apps, you could easily have a different user interface, different algorithms, and there might be different policies and restrictions and features, and in some cases those won't line up perfectly, and that's okay. But then that's sort of what you're aiming at with that app, so you get to make those decisions. But as soon as it becomes a lock-in, then we have a problem. And I'm just using Twitter as an example because it's very familiar, but this applies to so many different applications. I sort of think of it like, if it ever bugs you, if you don't love it, if it bugs you and you haven't switched, then you're locked in. So here's just some of the, very recently Reddit has been having one of these little rebellions where people are like, we're going to leave, but they don't usually because of this lock-in. YouTube has had many of these over the years. Lots of different apps. You've probably had that experience many times yourself. So app freedom is the idea that users can move seamlessly between competing apps. And this involves the data being under the control of the user, not the app. And relationships are part of the data, so they move with you or stay with you. Competing apps can interoperate. So I'm using one, you're using a different one, or I'm using two different ones in two different windows or on two different devices, and it all works the same. Communities have to cooperate for safety. We'll get into this a lot more because there's no police force across all of these apps. So how do you get safety? And in the end, we get a competitive market for apps and for hosting. So let's return to that list of problems I mentioned earlier and see how those might get solved with app freedom. In the case of unfair bans, because the apps would have no power to ban things, or you could move to another app and get it there, users pick their own host, and that is where the policies are. And since they can pick one, if they get banned, they can move to another host in general. Obviously, there are limits to that. Like for blatantly illegal activity, they'd have a hard time finding a host that would allow that. For empowering harms, we have this community defense that, again, I'll talk about more later. For surveillance, we can change the incentive structure here. Surveillance capitalism doesn't really work very well in an app freedom world. So, and you can pick hosts that have the policies you like and are in the jurisdictions you like. Doesn't necessarily, I'm not trying to sidestep law enforcement surveillance. I think that's actually often a good thing. There's some balance there, though, and getting rid of corporate surveillance seems like a good plan. For algorithmic corruption, big change there, because users pick their own apps, they can pick their own algorithms within those apps. Again, dark patterns hopefully go away, because dark patterns feel bad, and as soon as the app makes you feel bad, you switch to a different one. Just like if the salad dressing suddenly started tasting bad to you, you just switch to a different one. For unwanted UI changes, again, you use the one you feel like using, no problem. For unwanted policy changes, you pick your app and you pick your host, so hopefully you can find ones that have policies you like and don't change when you don't want them to. So that's the idea of app freedom, and I've set up appfreedom.org. Doesn't have much content yet. Hopefully it will at some point, kind of a rendezvous spot. And just to sort of define that, app freedom is the ability to move easily between competing apps, keeping all your data and connections. So that's the first part here. I've sort of explained what app freedom is now. I think, I'm not claiming this is original. I don't know if that name has been used. But as far as I can tell, nobody's really crusading for this. And I think that's because they don't know how to get there. It seems probably impossible or impractical. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to sketch out how we get there. So part 2, a technical solution. I'm a technical guy. And there are 4 key technologies here. each of which has sort of arisen over the time in trying to get to this point. The first and most obvious, and I'll go through each of these in much more depth, but I want to first name what each of them is. The first is just to store the data under user control. The second is to use data translators between different data formats or schemas. The third is to have a network of credibility assessments. This will be our key to community defense. And finally, to use a user data sandbox, which I will explain when we get there. So storing data under user control. This has been around for a while. Here's a diagram I did back in 2012 on the Cross-Cloud project at MIT, which produced Solid. The idea here is that you have Alice and Bob trying to schedule a meeting, and in the world then, and also the world today, the non-app freedom world, the two of them have to pick one system, and here you see they pick Doodle, so their devices all communicate with Doodle. And the databases, these piles of disks next to each of them, are part of that application. So Doodle has its own application, and Alice and Bob have to use the same one. That's the current world. And we switch to a data under the control of the users. Now you see the disks are with the users, and either user, either device can talk to any of the different software, use the software they want, and it still works with their data. That's the vision. There's many different ways to do this, technologies to move the data around. I personally like what I would call blog-style decentralization, which is just using web technology, no fancy crypto, no real decentralized database, unless you consider the web decentralized, which, okay, we probably should. So every time you want to do a data write in an application, you're writing to the user's web space, kind of like making a mini blog post. Every time you do a read, you're reading across a variety of web pages or websites. You need some kind of host-to-host authorization and authentication, because this is not all data is public, of course. So I've been working on a protocol I call SiteQuery that handles this. I'm sure there are other options out there. This is, as I say, something people have been working on for a long time. Now we get into things that I don't hear a lot of people working about. So second point is we need these bridges between different parts of the world, because each application stores its data in its own format, or even if we agree on the format, and probably our data store is going to require that. So then we still need the same scheme. We still need a schema for each application, like what the shape of the data is. This always varies sort of randomly between, even a very simple to-do list. Two different applications are going to have a different schema for that if they don't collaborate. So what do we do about that? Because they can't work together. Like one application can't read another application's data if the schema is different. So what usually happens is one of two things. The market leaders define it. Usually the first major app to market will define it, and the others will be compatible with it. The problem is that as the market leader ends up having this control of the market, they can change things, arbitrarily arrange things to harm the competitors. So it's highly anti-competitive. The other common answer is open standards. And I did this work at W3C for many years, and it works, but it is slow and expensive. I mean, this is how email is. You can move between different email clients, and you can move between different web browsers because of open standards. And there's some calendar sharing and a few other places where we have this. But for instance, in the social media space, it took about 10 years between social media being big and W3C having standards for it. And during those 10 years, so many opportunities were lost. And it becomes very hard to change it and adapt to new ideas. So that's a pain. So you usually end up with a case that apps just don't work together. So what's my answer? My answer is translation shims, or translators, where each app uses whatever schema it wants. And when you publish, apps are forced by the platform to publish their schema. And then when another app wants to read that data, it declares the scheme it wants to use, and then the system can look for trusted shims or translators. So you go from the schema of writing to the schema of reading. And those translators run in a special sandbox, so they don't need to be particularly trusted. And you end up with interoperability. I think this creates an ecosystem, or could create, if done right, it could create an ecosystem. We have a trust network to find the shims. We'll talk more about trust networks next. The incentives are in the right place. Like right now, often competing app developers don't want to allow people to move between the apps because they don't want interoperability. They're not going to use each other's schemas because each of them wants to control and own the market. And that's bad for the users, but it's good for the app developers. So we get the wrong incentives. And here we switch the incentive because each app is forced to declare its schema. That's pretty straightforward, but that lets other people, either end users or other vendors, create the translation shims. Interestingly, these shims tend to be very small and self-contained for each property or set of properties. So this might be very well suited to LLM authoring. In time, it may be that everyone starts to see one of the schemas is really the best, and everyone just starts to use that one, and then the shims become null, and you just can directly copy the data, and that's great. But you don't get locked into that because somebody comes up with a better idea 5 years later, and they can start to use a different schema, and again, the shims come back into play. So it's a bit out on limb there. I don't know of anything like this that's working today, but in various experiments and demonstrations, it seems possible, and I think it solves a vital problem here to give us that freedom. Next, oops, wrong direction. Next, these trust networks. How do you get community policing? And my picture here is one of my favorite demonstrations of trust. It shows how humans can collaborate when they really want to. And this particular tower is interesting. This practice is in Spain. Usually this one happens to be on the Mall at Washington, so we get the Capitol building in the background, which is another trust-related entity. So how do I propose doing this? Credibility assessments. The idea is that people tell the computers about what sources they trust, what are the high credibility sources, and what sources they distrust, the low credibility sources. And hopefully they give some reason, some explanation for why that is. Maybe they even link to evidence for why that is. And this will form a recursive credibility graph or a trust network. Let me give an example from some prototype code I did. So in this, here you have a screen where somebody is rating me, and they first indicate whether they know me. Do you know Sandra Hawk? We know each other. I know who that is. I'm not sure. Or skip. In this case, they've skipped. Briefly, what experiences most influence how much you trust Sandra Hawk? Again, this is a prototype. We could refine this. I think maybe it's better to have a bunch of buttons for common answers here. And then there's a numeric score if you want to really get into the details here and rating that. How much should people rely on what Sandra Hawk says? That's how I'm defining credibility on a scale of 1 to 99. From not at all, 50 is no opinion. In this case, they say 85. Reasonably, they deem me reasonably credible. And then here it is visualized as a graph. So the guest, So we see the guest labeled by the heart. They, of course, have this is guest number 28. That's just the username for this demo. And they link to me at a credibility rating of 85, so that means my credibility rating is 85. And you see I have rated a few other sources here. I rated this Caspian Hawk person 94% credible, and so that 85 and 94 combines to give Caspian an 81 credibility. Meanwhile, over here we get the politician Pete Buttigieg. who I happened to rate 80, and Caspian rated only 40, because everyone has their own decisions here. But that combines to give a fairly high rating because the guest trusts me more than Caspian, so my high rating weights higher than Caspian's low rating. In practice with a system like this, we need an interface that users can definitely understand and interact with comfortably, because it can get very complicated. So again, the idea is your ratings let apps know who you trust and who they should therefore trust when they're acting on your behalf. It argues to your community who community members should trust. Overall, it creates an ecosystem with a bias towards integrity. This is very experimental work. We're awaiting real user testing and experience, but it strikes me as this might be, I think will be, the scalable and safe answer to online trust and safety. No more letting the big tech companies have to decide what is trustworthy and what isn't. We can decide for ourselves with this tool for collaboration. I should say some of this work was done in the W3C Credible Web community group at credweb.org, and that work was funded generously by Google and Facebook and the City University of New York. One more point on that, the credibility network also proves identity, because you build up your crowd out of these testimony links. So it is, I think, quite strong against impersonation. AI can't really step into a network of people saying, yes, I have met that person, and yes, I have met that person. So we can be, you can set your criteria for what you decide your network is trustworthy, and so this is really strongly resistant against bots, even AGI bots. It does raise the question of, does this increase division? Because you could also use it to separate other ways that people might discriminate against each other. That is definitely a potential. And so the question is, how do we protect against that or mitigate that risk? I think disinformation is a lot of what is driving division in the society right now. So this pushes back against disinformation, so it could push back against that division. It also makes it more clear you're in a bubble. So maybe you don't necessarily want to be in a bubble. You want to see what's going on in the whole world. Maybe you think truth and accuracy are important and rational behavior. So all this enables you to take a better path there. And in general, I think a good user interface can nudge people in that direction towards increasing rationality. It brings evidence into the process. The computer can clearly, I said when you're giving credibility assessments, you should probably say what your reasons are and your evidence. Not in every case, but when you get to controversial cases, you can do that. And so this helps people support each other in making those credibility assessments. And in general, it's less driven by outrage engagement, which I think is another thing that's heavily increasing division. So that's a quick overview of how the credibility networks work. Fourth and final step, the user data sandbox. The idea here is that in this model of separating apps from the data, the applications, so it's risky to give apps full read-write access to your data. It kind of puts us back in the old days of PC viruses. The trust graph can help. We see this thing often, like, only install this software if you trust it. And I'm like, how am I supposed to know whether I trust this? Well, if we had a trust graph, it could show me that those developers are actually a friend of a friend of a friend of mine, and they all rate each other highly credible, so those developers maybe can be trusted. That's a step. But I think we can actually do better than that with sandboxing. And the idea here is that apps run in a restricted environment, so they can read and query anything you see. They run with access to all that data, any of your data, and any data of other people who they have given you read access to. and then it can process that however it wants within the computing resources it has, and display the application-specific view of that to your screen. And then if you want to make a change, it can propose making updates to your data. And those are always undoable and always attached to the application. So if you notice it doing something squirrely, you can mark that, share that with your community. Other people will be flagged, and you can easily undo all the changes it may have made, sort of peeling off the layer it put on top. And in a prototype, I find this actually a surprisingly nice coding environment. It's in many ways easier than a lot of other application situations, and performance, obviously there's a lot of work going on here, so performance is not going to be as good in general, but it's been pretty good so far, at least on the scale that we've tested. So to summarize, these 4 technologies which give us application freedom: putting the data in the user's web space, running data conversion shims to provide interoperability, using credibility networks for trust and safety, and user data sandbox to allow running untrusted apps. Next steps, working on some demo apps of the whole stack. There's a mailing list and resource list you can join at appfreedom.org. You can reach out to me. There's contact information should be here. I'm very interested in why this won't work. If I could stop and give up, go home, that would be okay. But I'd really like to see this work. And so far, every problem that's arisen, I'm like, yeah, here's a way we can work around that. Also looking for partnerships, people to work with and companies to work with on this. And in general, once you've gotten this idea of app freedom, I hope you will start to push for it yourself to totally separate from any work I've done. Use the concept of app freedom in your own application development, and in other apps you have some say in, and say, this is a thing we need, this is a thing we want. So let the users move seamlessly between the apps. Thank you very much.